Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything. Geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Porkins Policy Radio. As always, I am your host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this show here at American Freedom Radio, AmericanFreedomRadio.com, as well as on my website, which is PorkinsPolicyReview.com. And if you miss both of those chances, you can always tune in on Friday nights on a host of other stations, which, of course, rebroadcast this show. Well, before we get started with today's guest, just a quick few little Patreon announcements. So thank you, Marco, for the generous $5 a month donation. Of course, if you want to support the show and the work that I do and all the other podcasts and whatnot, you can always go to patreon.com/Pierce Redmond and you can become a monthly subscriber. And, of course, you can also subscribe on PayPal as well. So the PayPal links are up on my website for that. And also, Pamela, I hope I answered your question. Pamela, who's a longtime listener and early supporter of the show, both financially and just by listening, did send me a quick question about the first bonus podcast, which I think there was something wrong and people were getting dead links and the YouTube video wasn't working. So, Pamela, I hope I solved that problem for you, and I will be writing you a much longer email responding to, everything that you said in that. I just wanted to make sure that you got the episode. And, of course, I will be coming out with a new bonus podcast, hopefully that will be up in the next couple of days. I am trying to get it out for before February. I know I missed one in December, but that was just because of the holidays and everything. So I will be having that. And of course, if you subscribe before February rather to my Patreon, you will of course get access to Brian Heiss's documentary O.J. Veritas, the Furman tape. So it's a little incentive out there. If you become a subscriber on any level, whether it be $1, $3, or $5, you will get exclusive access to Brian's never-before-seen documentary. But with all of that now aside, I am very excited to welcome my guest, and that is Hugo Turner. He is a excellent blogger. He writes on his website, Anti-Imperialist-U, and you can find that at anti-imperialistu.blogspot.com. I have referenced Hugo's work before in the past. Hugo was a early supporter of the radio show and someone that we've maintained friendship over the many years that I have been doing this radio show. So Hugo Turner, how are you?
Great.
Excellent.
It's real to be on the show.
Yeah, I know, right? I was thinking back the other day to like some of our first sort of email exchanges when this was just like a podcast. And it does seem surreal, all these years later now you're finally on the show. Cause I remember I wanted to get you on when I first started the podcast and that must have been all the way back, maybe around the same time that you started Anti-Imperialist-U. But it's been a long time coming. I am very excited to have you on. But, Hugo, before we get into today's episode, and we're going to be talking about an excellent article that Hugo wrote on Ted Shackley, which of course will be linked up in the show notes, and I'll try and find that and drop it in the chat room as well. But Hugo, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? Who is Hugo Turner, and what is Anti-Imperialist-U?
I take a more historical approach to researching this. I try to get the real deep roots of what's going on now. So basically, I cover the Cold War and the War on Terror, what I like to call World War III and World War IV. So I cover geopolitics, current events, but also a lot of history, especially about different CIA operations like Operation Condor or Operation Gladio, their collaboration with Nazis, stuff like that.
Excellent. No, and again, for people that are unfamiliar with Hugo's work, I strongly encourage it. One, for the geopolitical stuff that you cover, and you cover you do some great articles on Libya, on Ukraine, on the current geopolitical scene. But it is very much a blog that gets into history, deep history, as you call it, and deep state events, and much of the hidden sort of CIA history that I think people know to a degree, they know the sort of general sense of what it is, but you go a lot deeper into all of that in your articles, and this is long form journalism. You've got a great series that we're going to link up to as well on Iran Contra, for instance, a 4-part series that you wrote for the 30th anniversary of Iran Contra. Which was last year, that seemed to have gone completely unnoticed by the general public. But as I said, today we are going to be talking about an article that you wrote entitled "Ted Shackley: A Life in the CIA," and this is all about Ted, or Theodore Shackley, who is one of the most infamous characters in the CIA. He's he sort of charts the whole sort of history of the CIA. He was seemingly involved in everything. He had I think with the exception of a few major events in CIA history. But Hugo, why don't you give us a sort of a general outline of who Ted Shackley is? Because as you write, in the opening paragraph of your article, he recruited Nazis. He worked on the covert war against Cuba and Fidel Castro. He was a Station Cheif in Laos during the dirty war there, Station Cheif in Vietnam. He worked in Latin American affairs, helped to overthrow Allende in Chile. He was became deputy director of ops under Bush. I mean, this guy has sort of been everywhere. So give us a sort of general idea of who is Ted Shackley, just a sort of easy sort of picture of him.
Well, you've done a great job of laying out the CIA career. So I'll also say he's involved in the JFK assassination, possibly involved in the creation of 9/11. He was the center of the Iran Contra controversy. He's been involved in massive CIA drug smuggling. This is he's spies for Israel. He helped overthrow Jimmy Carter and put in Reagan. So, yeah, his career spans the whole kind of deep history, and he's always in the most infamous spots. That's why I was interested, because you start studying the CIA and you're hey, this guy Ted Shackley just keeps popping up everywhere. It's not only is he involved in trying to overthrow Castro, Operation Mongoose. If you see JFK, that's what they're talking about, Operation Mongoose. He was the manager of that, but he's also involved in Watergate, a whole range of scandals that many of them forgotten, Nugent Hand Bank or Eatsco, these different arms trafficking and drug money laundering schemes. He's a fascinating character.
Yeah, no, definitely. And we're definitely going to get to some of these forgotten scandals. It's something that you write about quite a bit on your blog. Things like Nugent Hand, Eatsco, the Safari Club, which was actually new to me. I had not heard of that until I started reading your article on Ted Shackley. But Hugo, why don't we kind of break this down, and we'll get we're going to kind of take a historical approach to this. And let's talk a little bit briefly about Ted Shackley's childhood. He is a little bit different from the sort of early traditional people that got involved in the CIA, like Allen Dulles and James Jesus Angleton. These were sort of Ivy League, Silver Spoon kids who, eggheads. Shackley is not quite like that. The sense I got reading your article was that his childhood wasn't horrible, but it certainly was unpleasant, and something that he didn't like. And there is this sort of mystique about Shackley. He was this intensely private person. So there's sort of all these different rumors. So explain a little bit about his early childhood.
Oh yeah, the rumor we like to put out, or they did, at least in stop people from believing was that he was an orphan adopted by the CIA. And that's why he was so obsessed with it. But like the truth was that he came from a broken home. His dad was like this bitter drunk. His mom like left his dad, and she was kind of more of a schemer and also like a liar and like very secretive. She was an immigrant from Poland, and she wanted everyone to believe that she was born in America and that she was and so she fooled everyone to believing this. And so at one point she sent Shackley to live with her mom, who he told her she was just her sister, and then like that's where Shackley learned Polish, which is why he was eventually recruited in the CIA. And then she moved to Miami, where like Shackley would later have a major role in the CIA. So basically, after high school, he wanted to go into World War II, but like the war ended before he could enlist. But then the new war is starting up, the Cold War, so he enlisted anyways. He goes to Germany instead of fighting the Nazis. He's recruiting them. He didn't seem to have any problem with that. And like the rumor that Daniel Sheehan, who's been like pursuing this guy for a long time, but is also known for sometimes making errors in fact, like needing a fact checker, is that Shackley was the deputy to Reinhard Gehlen himself in Germany. And that's why he had this meteoric rise. If people don't know,
there's no proof of that, right?
I couldn't come across any proof of it, but it's a great, like, Sheehan had all these intelligence guys feeding him all this information or disinformation. So it could be true, but I couldn't find the proof of it or anyone else saying it.
And there, as you write, there aren't a lot of details about his time in Germany. As you said, we know he joined the military intelligence, that he was assigned to counterintelligence, and you speculate, and I think it's rightful that there aren't many details because he probably was recruiting Nazis left and right, which should continue.
Well, that's what the Cold War is really all about. Is like immediately America allies with Nazi Germany and Japan, tells the world, they've reformed, it's all democratic now, so don't worry. But really, it's like the same people in charge, except for like some of the most notorious people who were put on show trials. The other people were like Reinhard Gehlen or Hans Globke were behind the scenes. And it was really just the same Nazi deep state on like a democratic veneer. So, of course, Shackley was working with Nazis because that's what the CIA in Germany, all their agents came through the Gehlen network. And they just took over that network. So whether he was working with Eastern European emigres or with people in the Soviet Union, all of it you had to go through Gehlen to get to these people, basically. So he was involved in this Gehlen network because that's what the CIA in Germany was really all about, was working with these Nazis to wage covert war on Russia and the Soviet Union.
And then he goes to the University of Maryland. He turns down an opportunity to go to Princeton, which is interesting. He marries his high school sweetheart. That doesn't last too long. And then he wanted to go to law school, but he ends up getting called again during the Korean War. And this is when he's actually recruited into the CIA. He then goes to Nuremberg. He works under Lucian Coyne, who's like one of the most he's, I think, in my opinion, even more infamous than Ted Shackley. Well, explain a little bit about his getting recruited into the CIA and then working under Lucian Coyne and what he does, because he rises very quickly within the CIA ranks, even after he's initially recruited. Explain a little bit about this, Hugo.
Well, to some extent, the military's counterintelligence corps was really just a cover for the OPC, which is kind of like it was a precursor to the operations side of the CIA, which was originally outside the CIA and then incorporated into the CIA. So it's not really that surprising that he might have been in the CIA earlier, basically, is what I'm saying, or
right.
The OPC. But yeah, he was recruited into the CIA after 3 months back in the army. He sent back to Germany with Lucien Conein. Lucien Conein worked with Ho Chi Minh during the war. He was like an advisor because we were allied with the Vietnamese against the Japanese. And he later authorized the coup against Diem, which was like the puppet that we put in. It was killed 2 weeks before Kennedy was killed. And he was deeply involved with these Korsky gangsters. He was in the Korsky a sworn member of the Corsican Blood Brotherhood. And so basically, yeah, he's one of the more notorious characters. And then later he forms a DEA hit squad for Nixon or whatever, bumping off like rivals to CIA supported drug dealers. So
taught Daniel Ellsberg how to kill people.
Yeah, he also he told Alfred McCoy all about the politics of heroin, and then later was like, no, I was just lying or whatever.
Yeah.
So, and the other guy that Shackley meets in Germany is this guy, William Harvey, who's a former FBI agent who would go on to, like, manage the assassination attempts against Castro and, like, the recruiting of the mafia. But he's a very famous CIA guy. He's, like, the one that the mainstream people love to talk about because he's, like, he's not CIA, he's FBI. He's more, like, you know, loud talking, obnoxious, kind of.
Yeah, he doesn't
alcoholic. He was always armed. He always carried 2 guns. And so, like, Shackley becomes his protege. And so that starts his meteoric rise where, like, this guy is supposed to be appointed head of Czechoslovakian affairs. He goes back to America for, like, a brief vacation. He comes back. Not only is Shackley taking his job, but all of the satellite countries, like the Warsaw Pact, like countries that weren't part of the Soviet Union, but were part of, like, you know, the area that they controlled in Eastern Europe. Shackley was put in charge of all of those countries. So he's, like, waging covert war, information warfare, trying to infiltrate spies and all this stuff. And so, you know, the guy goes on vacation for 3 months. You find out, like, Shackley has already taken over everything behind him. That's kind of like a story that...
Well, and that also seems like sort of like for the shades of, like, who Shackley really is. He is this, like, kind of backstabbing opportunist.
Yeah, he's a very ambitious, ruthless character.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, it's like, you know, you're going to take a vacation, like, forget about having a job when you get back. It's also when he goes back to Europe, this is also when he meets Hazel Burson. And you briefly kind of mentioned her in the article, but just give the listeners a little, you know, kind of explanation as to who she is. Because Shackley leaves his wife to marry Hazel Burson, who was also married at the time, right, to another CIA officer, and is rumored to be sort of like the brains behind Shackley or so, at times. Explain a little bit who she is.
That's what one of the CIA guys joked to David Korn, like the author of one of the books I read, was that she was like a much better criminal mastermind than Shackley could ever be. But they didn't really explain what they meant. But she was this Native American she was also in the CIA, like an analyst, but mostly like a secretary kind of thing. And she was married to this other CIA guy, and like Shackley just saw her, fell in love with her, took this other guy away so they could spend more time together. Like totally got rid of his high school sweetheart. He just told her, like, I refuse to live with you, I refuse to support you, I refuse to love you. Just like, it's over. It's like it's so cold. And he marries Hazel Burson instead, and like she ended up going to Laos with them, and like she also had her CIA thing. She worked for the Reagan campaign and was probably involved in like overthrowing Carter. We do know that.
Yeah, no, really, I mean, a fascinating, like, power couple, and, you know, like, someone you would not want to cross. Which is funny because people have this, Shackley did encourage this, like, you know, really strong loyalty to, you know, the people were, I mean, viciously loyal to this guy. But he would, and he definitely wanted, you know, people's, you know, undying loyalty, but he was like totally willing to stab virtually everyone in the back that he ever like worked with. So just sort of fascinating, weird character, and you know, I wonder, you know, he in many ways is like, I think one of the prototypes for like the type of person that the CIA looks for. You know, I remember like Tom Secker and I always like, you know, talk about, in a lot of these Hollywood films with CIA backing, there is this like moment where, you know, the character exerts or possesses these quote unquote qualities that the CIA looks for. And Shackley seems to have like all of those, you know? So, you know, fascinating to look at him just from that perspective. But moving along, he later goes to Miami, He hooks up with like every Cuban terrorist like known. He recruits Cubans into S-Force, including a bunch of the soon to be Watergate burglars, Rafael Chichi Quintero, Felix Rodriguez. These are pretty nasty characters. This is when he develops his hatred of JFK and RFK as well. And he also betrays his mentor, William Harvey. Explain a little bit about Cuba and what was going on in Miami with him.
Well, yeah. Well, when he's in Miami, he Harvey's like FBI. Shackley decides he could switch over to a better faction, which is like the old OSS Detachment 101 guys, which is this trio of people: Paul Helliwell, William Pauley, and Desmond Fitzgerald, who had set up the heroin out of Asia, like in Burma, in like 1945 or whatever, after the war. So they were kind of like the older generation of the Shackley types. And Desmond Fitzgerald liked the fact that he was willing to betray people and like always blame like a superior or like one of his, people beneath him for like the mistakes that are made. And like, I guess Fitzgerald did the same stuff, so he became Fitzgerald's prodigy instead. And like, Fitzgerald was so very well respected within the CIA. And like, he went to the higher ups and was like, this guy should be the future director of the CIA. That became Shackley's future career path until it was, unfortunately, quote unquote, stopped by like the mid-70s scandals in the Carter era. So he's involved with these international gangsters that are like, involved with the Meyer Lansky syndicate. There was smuggling heroin through Cuba and the KMT in Asia and the Hmong in Laos. And because of that, he is selected to go to Laos next. But also while he's in Miami, he's, trying to kill Castro. He provokes the Soviets into putting the missiles in there with his, campaign to try to overthrow the Cuban government. And so, the whole Cuban Missile Crisis is, a result of the Operation Mongoose that he's running, under orders from RFK, who's, super mean to him.
Yeah. There seems to be, a mutual hatred there going on.
He's like, these CIA incompetence, why is it so hard to, I don't understand how they thought they could have a coup in Cuba when, it's I'm sure Fidel's generals are people who are well, they're still enthusiastic. It's only been 3 years since the revolution. They're not exactly all going to sign up for the CIA and overthrow Castro or whatever. But yeah, as you know, it was a failure.
Yes. And just quickly for people, listeners might remember about Paul Helliwell from the CIA in Hollywood episode where we talked about Race to Witch Mountain, because Paul Helliwell, of course, helped to develop Disneyland. And he was the owners of Disney. They went to Paul Helliwell, who helped them develop the quote-unquote city, the two cities that are encompass Disneyland. And they're basically ghost towns, and Helliwell used this in Vietnam and in Laos and other places like that. So very fascinating character. And just one other thing, when JFK is killed, Shackley he is friends with virtually every, not every, but many of the JFK or the probable JFK assassins, or at least the guys that were involved in the assassination. And Shackley was instrumental in pushing the theory that it was all the Russians and the Cubans for his entire life. Very fascinating. This is something I didn't know either. He's briefly sent back to Germany, where he says, quote, "I am here to tear down this wall," which is just a bizarre, that he said this, so many years before Reagan, even thought about getting into politics. But let's move on to July 1966, because this seems to be the sort of, this is when Shackley really kind of comes into his own, when he becomes the station chief in Laos. And Hugo, give us a little bit of background on the what was going on in Laos at the time, particularly the CIA sort of turning it into a narco state and using the Hmong people as their mercenary force. Explain a little bit about this.
Yeah, basically the whole war in in Vietnam, there was like the military, there was like the major fighter force, and in Laos, the whole war was run by the CIA through these drug-financed armies. And you have the two sides. You have the Royal Laotian Army, which is like the government forces. They're total heroin traffickers, like the generals, like Owen Radicone. And then you have the Hmong, who are these sort of indigenous people that like kind of hunter-gatherers. They grew their own food. They had this belief in like spirits and stuff like that. And the French had hired them as mercenaries, basically, to like, they traditionally grew opium, and so like the French started like helping them with their opium trade, and in exchange they would fight for the French. And then like once the French lost, the CIA took over. And then by the time Shackley arrives, they've become very like, the Laotian army was not very good, and like, so they were relying more and more on these Hmong. And like Shackley was a success when he arrived, so he's like, well, why don't we just massively expand it? We'll like make it all about the Hmong. But there wasn't very many Hmong to begin with. There's only like, a couple 100,000 of these people. And their General Vang Pao, who's their leader, basically just signed them all up in the mercenaries in exchange for like being allowed to deal heroin, make these huge profits. And so the entire Hmong people, they got them into this war with the North Vietnamese, which they eventually totally lost, and were like forced out of the country, and they're still like in a terrible shape today, apparently. Some of them actually were like settled in South America and like did dirty work for like dictatorships, or like some of them even fought in like with the Contras, which is kind of strange. But yeah,
there's also like a big Hmong population in Los Angeles, and they're very involved in gang activity. All through Los Angeles, there's a lot of Hmong gangs as well.
That's fascinating.
Well,
but yeah,
no.
Oh yeah, so basically Shackley creates this big disaster. Like hundreds of thousands of people are killed, but American soldiers, not that many of them are killed. So it's like a massive success from like the CIA's perspective, and it's like they didn't have to pour all this money in because it's all financed through drugs, so it was like super cheap. So it's a success from like a financial standpoint. So it's like, why not just send Shackley to Vietnam next? Despite whatever, like Shackley planned this huge battle that just turned into like a complete fiasco where like everyone's like, don't do this. It's like a terrible idea. He's like, no. This is like, I'm going to have this scheme and like basically ends in a huge rout or whatever. But despite that, he was sent on to Vietnam.
And just, again, back in Laos, quickly, we've got the war in Laos, as you write, would become the sort of future, or would form the blueprint for pretty much all of the sort of future covert wars that the CIA and the deep state and the military would implement. So we've got this indigenous group of people who are on the CIA payroll. They're funding much of this through the use of drugs. This is like, in a lot of ways, this is, obviously what happened in Afghanistan, both in the 80s and then later on, more recently in 2001. But, you also point to things like Libya, where you had, these mercenary forces, like Al-Qaeda mercenary forces, being supported by, NATO, airships. Again, very similar to what was going on in Laos. Essentially, we get the Hmong people being turned into quote unquote a conventional military force, as you write, much to the chagrin of CIA operatives who have been working with the Hmong for many years. And there's even the sort of Laotian Dien Bien Phu called Shackley's Folly. He was literally, at times just using the Hmong as like cannon fodder, wasn't he? He was just sending them out to be killed. He didn't really care.
Well, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm sure he cared, but just sort of like they're pawns in the game. He actually liked the Hmong. Like he liked Vang Pao. Like even though he was all buttoned up or whatever, right? It was this weird kind of thing, where like a Dances with Wolves kind of thing. Right. But that didn't stop him from just being like, yeah, you're a tool, just like with his friends in life, where he would sacrifice them, he would sacrifice his whole people. And even but after the war, he became like their patron. He was like, he dedicated his book that he wrote about how we need to wage counterinsurgency war on the planet to the Hmong, and it's like, or actually called them The funny thing is the CIA always called them the Miao, which is what the Chinese word for barbarians, where it's like the mankind. Like
I know that almost just sounded like, keeping them in their place,
Yeah, it's like even though they're friends, they're still totally insensitive and racist. So it's like,
yes,
the Miao, the barbarians. Oops.
No,
but yeah, it was the airstrikes combined with the irregular forces that was like the blueprint that for Libya or like Afghanistan, where like we had the Northern Alliance, the NATO bombers, and we took over the country, and like in Angola, where they had united of fighting with like the South African Air Force supporting them. That's what Shackley was proud of. It's like I was the first one to totally coordinate the Air Force with these irregular forces. Like one of the things he had the Hmong doing was like calling an airstrike on the Ho Chi Minh Trail and stuff. So that's what he was most proud of. It's like
right. And of course too, he admits that he quote looked the other way vis-a-vis the drug trade, but he was probably, he was much more deeply involved than he let on, and he assigned his right-hand man, Thomas Kleins, to one of the key drug trafficking bases, as well as another ally of his, David Morales. And just briefly, he intervened directly in the Laotian Opium War in 1967. Explain what that is. I think it's just a fascinating, again, one of these little bits of history that people just have no idea about.
Well, he got future Iran Contra figure Richard Secord to bomb these people that were battling bang power of the opium trade, and he just called in like American bombers on them, so that they won that like gang war. It's like you got the American Air Force fighting on your side in the drug turf war. But like, the Thomas Kleins is like the major important figure because he's like Shackley's shadow. He like carries out Shackley's dirty work. He becomes like Shackley's partner, like when he's in Miami, and then he will like follow him all throughout his career and after the CIA or whatever. And David Morales is one of the people that had bragged about the role in the JFK assassination. And Daniel Sheehan names him as like one of the 5 people that he thinks actually killed JFK. He was called the Indio. He was a veteran of the Guatemala thing and all sorts of crazy stuff. And he also was known to work with the mafia.
Yeah, and again, you don't appoint these people to. Was it David Morales who was he was like in charge of like the Air America base or like the radar station. So literally, he was like in charge of the planes that were shipping heroin out of Laos.
He was in charge of where the Air America would fly in at Paxi in Laos. So definitely.
So pretty wild stuff.
He was friends with Santos Traficante back in Florida. So there's like this massive wave of heroin flew in through Florida.
Yeah,
Santos
exactly.
Traficante is a fascinating character. His name, he wasn't actually Italian. It's not his real name. But his name basically means patron saint of like traffickers, like Santos Traficante.
Yeah, that's right. No, yeah, and again, people can check out like Doug Valentine writes a lot about him in Strength of the Wolf. Traficante is a major figure in that book. Shackley is sent to Saigon. I guess, because of his wild success in Laos. And he's assigned Station Cheif in Saigon. He's brought in after the Tet Offensive. So sort of to, save face and stuff. And he basically just starts lying left and right. Explain this, because this is like, again, another one of these, like, it's just sort of become part and parcel of what the CIA does. But he was just lying to Nixon and Kissinger. Well,
the role of the CIA is not to provide intelligence. The role of the CIA is to provide propaganda that's for the bureaucracy. And also they control the press and feed us, the normal people, like their propaganda, and they directly feed the propaganda into the government, like the Russians are coming back in Germany, or we're winning the war in Vietnam, like it's working, everything's fine. That's what Kissinger and Nixon wanted to hear, and he knew that like they just tell them what they want to hear and you will stay in there. Like if he'd been like, this is going terribly, that would have been that would have been an insult to Kissinger and Nixon, and he would have been out of there.
Right.
So of course he's telling him like, yeah, we're winning the war in Vietnam, everything's going great. the CIA basically reported that up until the end, not because they really believed it, but just because, like, that's what people wanted to hear. That's what they distort intelligence. You know, these aren't intelligence failures. They're intelligence lies, you know, like WMD in Iraq. It's not like they didn't mess up. They just, like, lied.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and again, too, I mean, the whole time, you know, presumably these guys are all enriching themselves as well. You know, Shackley seems very much tied into the heroin trade, so obviously he's making money while he's doing all of this. And you talked too about this sort of like, you know, Shackley is this really driven guy where he really doesn't seem to have any ideology. You know, they're just sort of like, Vietnam is... Say again,
he was a very fierce anti-communist. He's Polish or whatever, so he really hates the Russians, like Zbigniew Brzezinski. And it's like while he was in the CIA, he pretended to be apolitical, but as soon as he got out, he was writing like neocon screeds, you know, like we're losing World War III. The Soviets are advancing everywhere, even though he knows it's balls because like he's like one of the people that caused them to invade Afghanistan intentionally. And he's like, you know, they invaded, they're advancing, they're trying to conquer the world, like.
No, that is true. That is true. I guess I was sort of almost like from I mean, like, what does he really care about in Vietnam? Like, nothing. You know, I mean, he knows that this is all falling apart, and he just sort of, you know, it's sort of like when he's told something, he just does it. He doesn't ask questions. He's just he just follows orders. He didn't really he didn't think about like, you know, is this right? Like, what are we doing? Is that one of those CIA officers that got drunk after work? It's like, what are we doing here? You know, he just sort of like, straightforward, follow orders, give orders. This is what we're doing. Something about, just sort of like, this is the world that we've created, and we're gonna live in it, and we're gonna do whatever the hell we want to do. Well, obviously, you know, spoiler alert, Vietnam falls, and his next assignment, which I guess is just a little bit before the fall of Saigon, he's sent he's in charge of the Western Hemisphere Division. Again, sort of running damage control after Phil Agee kind of goes rogue and starts outing a lot of CIA secrets. What was going on? Because he did, again, played a very important role in Latin America at that time.
Yeah, I want to plug this book that everyone should read called Predatory States by J. Patrice McSherry on Operation Condor. So I think it's one of the most like revealing books on American foreign policy. But yeah, he goes down there. I mean, he doesn't go down there. He manages it from Washington, but he sends all his minions down there. You know, work with Operation Condor, which is like this global. Well, it didn't exist yet, but like the global fascist network in Latin America, which is these right-wing dictators that would like kill anybody who was like, you know, could we have more schools? Can we have more hospitals? Can we have like higher wages or anything like that? It's like, no, like this society is going to be run for American corporations, and the best way to do that is to like kill anybody that dares to question anything. So he's very instrumental in overthrowing Allende and in setting up this Operation Condor all over Latin America. That like the program itself was set up to just assassinate people that have different countries. But the people that were instituting the program were like the people that were in charge of these different police states all over Latin America. So that became very much like a blueprint. It was very much like the Phoenix program that had been set up in Vietnam to just kill everybody that was suspected of sympathizing with communists or socialists or peace or anything to the left of like Ronald Reagan, basically.
Yeah. And you also talk a little bit about he placed some of his sort of loyalists down there and began to sort of integrate into the cocaine trade. Anything to say on that?
Yeah, there's this one fascinating operation called Operation Torch where they actually put these homing beacons so that drug smuggling planes could fly directly from Colombia into Panama. And he had Thomas Klein set this up. And while Thomas Klein was setting it up, he was pretending to be this guy, Edwin Wilson, who they were like in the process of framing for being a rogue agent, but he thought he was still working for them.
That's right. Yes.
So yeah, in the the Condor network is a drug network. Like the secret police of Chile, DINA, are like drug smugglers. So of course, even before Iran Contra, the cocaine is flowing through with Shackley's friends. And also, this is the same period where the DEA idiotically comes to the CIA and is like, can you help us fight the war on drugs? And so Shackley's like, sure. And the way that the CIA fights the war on drugs is by recruiting drug dealers to, like, tell them information. Because, because the CIA guy told Doug Valentine, like, the police want to, like, arrest people. The military want to, like, create a battle. And the CIA want to recruit people, you know, and infiltrate. So they don't, so basically they just use an excuse to, like, sabotage any attempt to, like, stop the flow of drugs out of Latin America and to make sure that, like, the DEA is only going after drug dealers that the CIA isn't supporting and, like, helping their drug dealers that the CIA is supporting by, like, knocking off their competition.
Oh, and again, that's sort of like the big, you know, the sort of serious stages of solidifying CIA control over the DEA, you know, where now they're just an extension of them. Now we move to 1973, and again, Shackley continuing his upward trajectory in the CIA. He becomes the head of the Far East Division, and this is where he would befriend probably his most important ally, and that's the then current ambassador to China, George H.W. Bush. What was going on there?
Well, George Bush was he was like recruited in the CIA long before people think. Like, people think that he just became director, but as people have long suspected, in a sense, been like proven by people like Russ Baker and Joseph Trento, Bush was in this. Alan Dulles recruited Bush in the CIA as a way to, like, have leverage over his father, Prescott Bush, who was in charge of supervising these covert operations for the CIA. So it's been, like, you know, multi-generational Bush intelligence ties. And so basically, the most interesting thing about that is that Bush and Shackley and their, I think James Lilly, recruited future ruler of China, Deng Xiaoping, the same one who instituted all those capitalist reforms in the 1980s. He was like a CIA agent. That's a bit of
explain that a little.
Well, that's all I know about it, really, because, like, the guy, I read it. It's in Legacy of Ashes, this kind of lame book about the CIA. But, like, it's just sort of like this throwaway line, not worth investigating or thinking about. It's just like, yeah, we recruited Deng Xiaoping during the 70s as a CIA agent.
Well, and again, and the Bushes are always been in love with you know, China and this. I mean, I'm not even sure why they call it communist China anymore. It's not really. I mean, or it's like the kind of communism that I guess exists in this world right now. But you also talk about that Shackley might have dug up some dirt and some blackmail on George Bush. What was that?
It was an affair that Bush was having, according to Joseph Trento. Although I hear it was with, like, a woman. Although I hear Bush's taste, like, lay elsewhere, basically, generally.
Really?
So,
okay.
like, yeah, Shackley and Bush become a partnership the same way Kleins carries out Shackley's dirty work. Shackley becomes like the shadow arm of Bush. He does all Bush's dirty work for, like, the next 15 years. And he eventually becomes Bush's speechwriter, his advisor. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost the wildest thing, is becoming his, like, speechwriter. You know, I mean, I think, and again, that it goes to show the closeness that they had. They did have this deep, personal relationship. And then, of course, when Bush becomes the head of the CIA, Shackley is elevated to, and he becomes, like, deputy director of operations, but is essentially, he's the director of operations. The man who's ostensibly in charge of him is merely a figurehead at the time. Yes.
Yes, this is the best. This is, like, one of the best parts of the Shackley story. 1976, the year Bush is director of the CIA, and somehow this is, I don't know why people in the alternative media aren't talking about this. It's like the 200th anniversary of America, and Bush is on this fascist terror campaign. Like, in Argentina, they installed this fascist dictatorship, which is, like, totally crazy. Like, people should look into, like, the ideology of these people and, like, just, like, the stuff that they were saying about, like, you have to cut out the cancer of subversion out of our society and, like, you know, just kill all these people and then we'll, like, purify it and create this perfect free market dictatorship. Or really, they just want to kill off all the dangerous people so they can return to democracy with like all the troublemakers gone. And in Miami, they get back together with their old friends, the Cubans, to form this new group, Koru. And like, this is another thing I can't believe this is written down in the history books. They carry out 300 bombings in Miami in that year alone. I mean, you think about, like, imagine if there was 300 bombings. It's like Al-Qaeda has nothing on these Koru Cuban terrorists. Yeah. They're just like allowed to operate with a free hand on American soil. Their most famous bombing is killing Orlando Letelier in Washington, D.C., like a couple of blocks from the Capitol, on like Embassy Row, basically. They blow him up in a car bomb. They kill an American who's with them, Ronnie Moffett. And they also blew up a Cuban airliner that killed 73 people.
Yeah.
So it's like, and this is also the same year that Bush turns over like the World Anti-Communist League. He invites all these SS people to join in Europe and tries to kick out like the regular conservatives and just have like SS dominate the Western European branches. I mean, it's like 1970, and it's a year where all these people are murdered to shut them up about different things they know about JFK or Watergate, and like William Harvey dies that year, and like Johnny Roselli, who'd been like one of the mafia people involved in the plot to kill Castro and who was implicated in the JFK assassination, he ends up dead in an oil drum. Bush helps protect Shackley from an investigation by refusing to tell the police who was the chief of station in Miami during the Kennedy assassination, basically. Bush and Nixon are two of the only people in the world who didn't remember where they were when Kennedy was assassinated, and where they were was in Dallas.
Yeah. Well, you read about the rumors that Shackley had 17 people killed on his behalf in order to cover up his crimes.
It was probably actually even more than that. But yeah, they had this enemy, Eugene Wheaton, who was like, he was in Iran and he just saw what these people were doing. It was like, this is like criminal conspiracy. And then he just saw that they were killing people to like keep them quiet. And a lot of people died. Like this guy, Kevin Mulcahy, and just like there's so... Like, Eugene Wheaton made a list of 17 people that died. But that was even before they started killing all the people to cover up the Iran Contra affair. Like, Barry Seal, who was, like, killed by, like, a Colombian death squad commanded by Oliver North himself.
Yeah. No, it really shocking the number of people. And again, like, all while they're on their way to either testify against Shackley or could pose some sort of, like, a threat to Shackley's rise up the ranks of the CIA, particularly the Roselli. It's one to take a look at, because I mean that's just and as far as we know, that's like an unsolved case, right? He just ends up in like an oil drum somewhere. I mean it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out.
The Cubans and the mafia killed him. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And also around this time is when Shackley becomes involved in the Nugan Bank, right?
Yes. The Nugan Bank is this. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, just say something because I was chewing. Sorry.
Oh no, I mean, this is again the Nugan Bank is I think one of those things that people hear about or they know kind of that it exists, but it's one of these again these moments. Particularly why I like Iran Contra or studying it, is that it is this window into the sort of day-to-day operations. As far as big an operation as Iran Contra is, it's not, unheard of. That's pretty normal. That's how the CIA runs everything. There's tons of Iran Contras. And Nugan is again, seems like, oh my God, it's this huge scandal, but it's really very typical. Explain quickly, because we're gonna be coming up on the break in a few minutes, but just flesh out a little bit. What is the Nugan Bank?
It was this bank that was set up in Australia to launder all the drug money that was coming out of the Far East heroin trade from like the CIA, and then they would use that money to like for arms deals. And one of the things that Nugan Bank was involved with was actually overthrowing the Prime Minister of Australia, Gough Whitlam. And in addition to all these CIA guys that were on the board of the bank, they also had all these military generals and stuff. And they told all the Vietnam veterans, like, put your money in Nugan Hand Bank, and they just, like, robbed all those people. Like, they never got their money back, all the low-level soldiers.
And there was a scandal with Nugan Hand and, as you say, Prime Minister Whitlam in Australia. I mean, they did write about this. And it's like fairly common knowledge in Australia that Whitlam, there was some plot, to sort of soft coup to get him out of there. It's widely accepted. You can look it up. It's like, I believe it's the, there's a term that they use for it in Australia. It's just like constitutional crisis, the way that they got rid of him. I think it's called, maybe it's something like the removal or something like that. I'll try and figure it out during the break. But it is this it was a big event in Australia. And again, it's one of these people know about like BCCI, but Nugan Hand is sort of like before all of that. And again, very shady characters.
It was like after like before Nugan Hand, there was also all these, like you said, it's a standard operating procedure. There was these banks like Castle Bank. And then once that closed, they had to open up Nugan Hand Bank. And like there's obviously like you've got the Golden Triangle heroin money, you've got like arms deals, like they used it to fund the war in Angola. And then once Nugan Hand closed, that's why they came up with BCCI basically. BCCI is not only involved in like drug and arms, but like the creation of Al Qaeda. So it's like this is the stuff that's still affecting us today.
And wasn't the Australian billionaire whose last name was Hand? He's the Hand in Nugan Hand. He's found dead, and isn't like in his like front, his like breast pocket is William Colby's calling card.
I think it was Frank Nugan that was found dead. Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Frank Nugan's found dead, and Colby's numbers in there because he was like a consultant for the bank. I think they intentionally left that in there because they didn't like Colby because he revealed too many secrets during like the church committee hearings that they thought he was like a traitor. There was like a split in the CIA between the Helms people and the Colby people, and like I think Shackley was definitely more of a Helms guy.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, there's no doubting William Colby was like the lawyer for Nugan Hand.
Yeah, he was a lawyer. Yeah. I'm saying they were covering it up, and then they just like leave that in there, so I'll be like embarrassed, like screw you.
Right. Yeah. Again, one of these sort of it's something people should look into because there is especially if you look at like Australian media, there's quite a bit that's been written about Nugan Hand and all of these sort of shady characters. There's also Eatsco is another one of these sort of scandals, and it's this company that's set up or is Shackley involved in the initial setup of that, or is he sort of joins on later?
It's Shackley, Edwin Wilson, who's like another of the most infamous CIA guys, Eric von Marbod, and Thomas Clyde. But Shackley tried to hide the fact that he was invested in it. They get Ed Wilson to give them $500,000 to set up this company that will ship the Egyptian arms that America is about to send them in exchange for them like betraying the Arab world as part of that like peace deal. They get the contract for that, and then they like rob the government blind, of course. But it's only like they steal $8 million. This is what Klein goes to jail for, like after all like the stuff he's been involved in. He goes to jail for like being involved in Eatsco. But like the most fascinating thing about Eatsco is that they trained the security for Sadat, and then his bodyguards that they trained killed Sadat. And then Mubarak's put in power.
who was like Eatsco's like number one guy, right? He was getting a million, bribes left and right from Eatsco.
Yeah, definitely.
Again, another one of these scandals that just seems to kind of go down like the memory hole. People, don't. And like Eatsco is. Oh well, we're coming up on the break right now. We are going to continue with my guest Hugo Turner in the second hour. More on Eatsco and all of these forgotten scandals, and of course Ted Shackley. So stay tuned.
basically narcotics.
Freedom.
Oh, yes, I like very much.
Radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
Are you feeling embarrassed and stuck because you can't focus or concentrate? I have a confession to make. I spent years unable to think clearly, like I was in a fog. I was going through the motions, running my companies, and I hated feeling groggy and mentally sluggish. I couldn't get ahead like this. It's no secret, the powers that be want us dumbed down. Chemicals, fluoride, our brains are under siege, and we are experiencing lower IQs. But now there's a weapon to fight back and win. Introducing DNA Evolve, a revolutionary breakthrough in a category of cognitive enhancers called nootropics. I've been using DNA Evolve and couldn't feel better. For me, it works. It feels great to get things done again and get ahead. Try a free sample for yourself at DNAEvolveSample.com. That's DNAEvolveSample.com. Supplies are limited, so go to DNAEvolveSample.com right now.
Did you know there are 3 million edible food plants on Earth, and none have the nutritional value of the hemp plant? HempUSA.org offers you hemp protein powder. It does not contain chemicals or THC, is non-GMO, and is 100% gluten-free. Hemp protein powder burns fat, builds muscle, contains 53% protein, and feeds the body the nutrients it needs. Call 888-910-4367 and see what our powder, seeds, and oil can do for you. Only at HempUSA.org. HempUSA.org introduces 3 brand new detox formulations of microplant powder. Brain Fuel for depression, bipolar disorders, and stress. Total Care, anti-cancer agent that cleans the liver and organs and increases memory. Rejuvenate, invigorates and heals the body, mind, and spirit. These products are your alternative to pharmaceuticals. Call 888-910-4367 and like us on Facebook. We ship worldwide. Only at HempUSA.org.
Yo, what's up? Check this out.
The voice of the revolution. American Freedom Radio. American Freedom Radio.
What about show business? Show business, completely dishonest, corrupt, and full of shit, but in a nice way. Plenty of expensive drugs and perverted sex. If you're going to be full of shit, might as well enjoy your work. Then you have the media. Not just the news media, let's include them all. The media are almost literally exploding with bullshit. Because they're located right at the crossroads of all the other bullshit. The media are made up of equal parts advertising, politics, business, public relations, and show business. These people are sitting right at bullshit junction. There's enough bullshit in the media for Texas to open a branch office. And you still have enough left over to start 2 law firms and a Christian bookstore.
What has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Provide us with free education?
Well, that's obviously effective, but apart from reversing the dumbing down of America...
All the information they provide is free?
What about the free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, man?
Exploiting commonplace corruption?
They help vulnerable people who don't have a voice?
Bringing light to important information nobody else does.
Or they never censor, hang up, or cut off their guests? Well, that's no fun, is it?
Oh, they created a fantastic alternative media source during an era of bad, manipulative, and infiltrated mainstream and alternative media shows and scam.
Okay, well, apart from the free education, free information, free podium for broadcast activists to speak from, exposing commonplace corruption, helping vulnerable people without a voice, bringing light to important information nobody else does, and creating a fantastic commercial-free alternative media source in a sea of bad, manipulative mainstream and alternative media shills and scum, what has American Freedom Radio ever done for us?
Donate to American Freedom Radio today. No rules, no rules, no taboo topics, no taboo topics, no fear of doom, no fear of doom. We are American Freedom Radio, American Freedom Radio. Porkins Policy Radio, offering a unique perspective on everything geopolitics, culture creation, the reality of the world we live in. Coming to you live from New York City, your host, Pierce Redmond.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to the second hour of Porkins Policy Radio. I am your host, Pierce Redmond. If you are just joining us right now, my guest is Hugo Turner. He is a longtime listener of my show. I am a longtime supporter of his blog, which is Anti-Imperialist-U.blogspot.com, where you can find all of Hugo's work. And Hugo's work is also published on a host of other websites, and we'll link up to some of those also, including SOT.net, which republishes a bunch of Hugo's work with some really excellent pictures and stuff. So you can put a face to some of the names that you hear, because there's so many different crazy characters when you start getting into deep history of the CIA. But if you're just joining us in the first hour, we were talking about the sort of official career of CIA man Ted Shackley. So we went from his early time recruiting Nazis all the way through his heroin trafficking days in Laos and Vietnam, helping to overthrow Allende in Chile, meeting up with his good buddy George Bush in China, and of course Shackley was also involved early on covering up CIA foreknowledge of Watergate, and as we were talking about towards the end of the first hour, his involvement in things like the Nukenhand Bank and also in Itzko, both of which are scandals that don't get nearly enough attention at all, like in the alt media. People just don't really focus on them or never point to them, even though there's quite a bit of information out there. But we wanted to kind of flesh out the second hour talking about Shackley's life and talking a little bit about, I guess, Shackley's sort of exit from the CIA. Now, when Bush is head of the CIA, there is this sense that, they can do no wrong, that they are just on the ascendancy, everything is looking great. Hugo, what happens when Jimmy Carter is elected? Because it doesn't bode so well for Shackley or for Bush.
Well, one of the reasons Carter is elected is he promised that he's going to, clean up the CIA. And,
right.
This is the post-Vietnam era and, the post-Watergate era, and people have, throwing all this ugly information about America that, we've got to stop this. Unlike today where they're just nobody cares. It's you can reveal anything, and there's never going to be any scandals or hearings or anything. But back then, there was this kind of crisis because they lost Vietnam, their confidence was shaken. And so Carter comes in, and Bush goes to him, he's like, I really want to stay on as director of the CIA for a couple more years, All his life he's been hiding the fact that he was in the CIA. Now he could not only could he openly be, I'm in the CIA, he's a director, he loves it. And Carter's like, no, I'm going to bring in my own people. Bush is like, fine. The day Carter's inaugurated, Bush resigns, and him and Shackley and other CIA people all immediately start plotting to bring down Carter. And they are doing covert operations in Iran. That's they realized in 1975 that the Shah was going to die of cancer, and they didn't tell Carter. So it's Carter's the Shah is a beacon of stability in the Middle East and stuff, all the stuff they make fun of him for after the fall of the Shah. And that's just because they didn't tell him what was happening. They just they cut off all intelligence. In Afghanistan, they're Brzezinski's working to start the Soviet invasion and all that. In Pakistan, they had the Zia-ul-Haq coup. So really this period 1975 to 1980 is that should be seen as the origin of the war on terror. Look into that. They put in these fundamentalist regimes in Iran, Pakistan, and started the war in Afghanistan. That's what is, of course, the same strategy they're following today with funding Al Qaeda to try to overthrow Assad and Gaddafi and destabilize Chechnya and all the stuff you cover on the Great Game Roundup.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, it's this like sort of overlooked aspect of deep history is, as you say, this time, 1976 to 1980. And, Bush vows revenge on Carter, and is definitely, for his sort of like mild-mannered, output is a, deeply cynical, deeply evil person. And he does, help, bring about the downfall of Jimmy Carter in a number of ways. Now, for instance, we've got the, Billygate scandal. Again, one of these things that is just, people just forget that Jimmy Carter even had a brother, Billy Carter. Explain a little bit, Billygate, because we've got Michael Ledeen, who, my listeners will know from, Robbie Martin's documentary series on, the neocons. This is one of neocon extraordinaire, definite CIA asset. What's Billygate?
Billygate is this scandal that they had trapped, Carter had, this idiot brother, Billy Carter, and they offered him a bunch of money to, represent the Libyan government to try to get back these planes that they'd already paid for, but that America was refusing to send them. And then they gave the information to Michael Ledeen, who gave it to, these press people who exposed this huge scandal, Billy Carter is in league with madman Gaddafi, That was one of the things that helped ruin Carter's reputation. The main thing that they did, of course, is the infamous October surprise, and there's also the deep October surprise, where the gang that Shackley was involved with was probably involved with making sure that Khomeini came to power instead of some other faction, like a left-wing faction or a nationalist faction in Iran. There's two revolutions in Iran. There's the initial overthrow of the Shah, and then they have this kind of interim government. It's sort of shaky, and then eventually Khomeini takes over that. But that didn't necessarily have to happen. People forget about that aspect. But basically, they probably engineered the whole hostage taking thing to begin with. But at the very least, they were caught giving the Iranians an offer that they would ship them weapons, give them a better deal than Carter would if they, instead of releasing the hostages like Carter was trying to negotiate for, if they kept them, which is the infamous October surprise. And Bush and Shackley were totally in on this. And then you have the Afghanistan thing, which makes Carter look weak, he's trying to fit through detente, and all of a sudden this seems the American public out of nowhere, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan, a country that I'm sure they'd never heard of before. And this is a major, even though Afghanistan had always been kind of a client of the Soviet Union to some extent. They totally freaked out over this, of course.
And you also talk about how Carter was sort of surrounded by these allies of Shackley and Bush, like Michael Ledeen, but also you mentioned that Brzezinski was recruited into the CIA by Shackley. What's the source on this, and a little bit about that, because that's a fascinating.
That's according to Joseph Trento. One of Shackley was Polish, and one of his jobs was recruiting Polish intellectuals and stuff for the CIA. And one of the people they recruited in the 60s, according to Joseph Trento, was Zbigniew Brzezinski. And another guy on Carter's national security staff is this guy Donald Gregg, and he also is a Shackley loyalist. But Carter had no idea that this guy is a Shackley loyalist, and he's the one who was sabotaging Carter from the inside. And then later Bush used him to run Iran Contra, basically. Donald Gregg. Well,
and also too, you're looking at Brzezinski, and this is again, people forget, but the godfather of Al Qaeda, or at least of the sort of Soviet Afghan war as we know it. And this is a guy again that boasted, it was totally fine to support a bunch of crazy radical jihadis and giving them money and arms and allowing them to traffic drugs, and this was all worth it in Brzezinski's eyes. Nothing wrong here. So
Brzezinski's eyes is great Brzezinski's eyes, it's it's great to let's start a nuclear war in Syria because our Al Qaeda allies are losing. But he's known as a realist, but when it comes to Russia, he's just insane, basically.
Yeah, right, of course.
I think Kissinger and Brzezinski both are like has totally CIA connected. These State Department guys that like run it from the top, they also have a CIA dimension to them.
Yeah, and that's like been, that's sort of very much the norm. Again, you can look at Hillary Clinton, why the CIA was so behind her. Again, former State Department. But there's also some, there's some other interesting kind of stuff going on here because, again, so as we've been talking about, Shackley is this sort of like archetype of a CIA man and is a window into how the CIA operates, from his, connections to drug traffickers to organized crime, of his sort of use of irregular paramilitary and mercenary forces with air support, all these things. But he also was sort of one of the sort of trendsetters in the private intelligence world. Talk a little bit about that, because this has now become a huge industry, and it's become totally accepted that there's the CIA and then there's a whole host of private organizations that nobody seems to have a problem with.
Well, yeah, as part of the whole Church Committee hearings, they decided it was a good idea. Like, the Congress has no right to call these corporations and these private intelligence corporations, so it's like, why not just privatize it? And then it's outside of the government, you can do whatever you want, and then there's nothing anyone can do about it. And also, why not form these alliances with, like, foreign governments and have them carry out our dirty work, which is, like, totally what we still do. But I call it, like, the axis of chaos. So it's like there's this Safari Club, which is very, very important in the creation of, like, Al-Qaeda. It's like Joseph Trento talks a lot about it in his book, Prelude to Terror, which I definitely recommend if you want to know more about it. But it's like an alliance between the French, the Saudis, the Israelis, the Egyptians, the Shah, to, like, carry out the CIA's dirty work off the books. And it's, like, involved with all, like, the banks and moving the money around and, like, the drug profits. And, this is what Al-Qaeda grows out of. This is, like, how they fund the war in Angola, and then this is how they fund the war in Afghanistan. And this is Al-Qaeda, basically. This is, like, the side, the business side. Like, people like you see Al-Qaeda, I'm sure, and all those Saudi billionaires.
Yeah, no, and the Safari Club is, it's embarrassing, but I really had no idea, that they existed. I feel as if I had vaguely heard of them, like mentioned or something, but I didn't quite know to the extent that they operated. And again, very involved in Africa, which is interesting. Again, and we see, so many, this sort of, official acts of Al-Qaeda in Africa. We've got the bombing in Kenya and Tanzania. We've got, Osama bin Laden in Sudan, hiding out. Africa is a very important component in the myth of Al-Qaeda. So it's very fascinating. Again, Safari Club was very instrumental on the African continent. And they were involved in things like intervention in Zaire. They provided arms to the Somalis when they fought against Ethiopia. And a whole host of, other things. And we'll explain what was Shackley's role within the Safari Club.
He was running it for George Bush. I mean, he was like he was running the American side. He was like out in both when he was before and out. And after he was finally kicked out of the CIA, he was the manager for the Safari Club. And also, I should mention that Angleton, who had always been like the Israel's friend of the CIA, which, I mean, it sounds to me like they're practically like spies for Israel. It's just perfectly okay. But like after he leaves, Shackley calls him up. He's like, "I will be your man at the CIA." And so that's like another aspect of the Safari Club is like the Israel connection, which will be very important, like in Iran Contra later. And so, Shackley is basically, he knows all these people in the special forces all over the government, and they, he could put together these off-the-books operations with these different people. Like, one of his specialties and like his friends is like setting up front companies all over the world. So it's not surprising that they could set up this privatized CIA that's like reports to George Bush and sent it to like the official CIA director, William Turner, which they totally hated. This Navy guy that they brought in to clean up the CIA. And like at one point, William Turner was short, and Thomas Klein sends him a tape of like the song "Short People."
Really?
Like, troll the director of the CIA, yeah, that song.
Well, that's so bizarre. Like, yeah, you know, only some CIA nut would do that. Now, so your big piece, Ted Shackley, Life in the CIA, ends around the time of the sort of early stages of Iran Contra, and you write that you're working on a second part to this because again, it's like that's such a.
I hope to write one day.
Yes, right, yeah. But you do talk again about Ted Shackley in your Iran Contra series that you did for the anniversary. So why don't we kind of flesh that out a little bit right now? Because again, you make the point that Shackley and Kleins were already kind of funding the Contras before Reagan was elected. What do you mean by that, and how deeply were they involved in these sort of things, and then how easy was it for them to just sort of transition once Reagan and Bush were in power?
Basically, like even before Somoza fell, like in 1978, Thomas Kleins goes down on behalf of Shackley to offer to like set up this privatized Phoenix Program Death Squad operation, which is sort of like that idea for the Contras comes out of later, but like. Somoza's like, no, I could set this kind of thing up myself, because really like Phoenix Program type operations are already like, that's what Central America is all about ever since the Guatemala coup in 1954 is like, death squads on the rampage, killing people. And Somoza already, so he's like, I could set up my own counterinsurgency program, but thanks. But then after Somoza falls, like Kleins goes down there and gets these Contras together and he's like, don't worry, Carter will be gone soon, Reagan's or they're maybe even hoping for Bush to come in, but like, Carter's going to be out of here, and then we will support you while you try to take back Nicaragua. Because these guys are like these Somoza's death squads, the National Guard or whatever that the army had set up back in the 30s. They are the Contras, and that's where like this whole connection comes from, basically. Although it goes back even way farther than that, where like Nicaragua was like involved in like the war on Cuba, even the Guatemala coup. It was like always a base, and like it was involved in the drug trade with like Meyer Lansky and Santos Traficante and like the KMT and Israel, and just like all these deep connections go back so many years. Always, that's what's fascinating.
Oh yeah, I know, and just that it's time and time again, it's a small group of people that seem to just sort of pop up everywhere. Like Shackley.
Yeah, that's what Dale Sheehan, like copying Fletcher Prouty, calls the secret team, basically. It's this whole cast of characters. Some of them are like from an older generation than Shackley. Some are younger, but it's like this, 40 of these CIA special forces types. They all like are working together, in business together, like trying to get rich while like killing a bunch of communists.
Yeah, right, yeah. And it's funny too, you look at the sort of like their trajectory, their history, you see them kind of like, there's like a group of like guys involved in Iran Contra, that, sort of they're behind the scenes, the secret plan, and then, not that long after, they're sort of at the front of the Bush administration when 9/11 happens. And this sort of trajectory of all of these guys. But explain what was going on when Iran Contra was happening, and which is most likely it was really being run by Bush, and Reagan either didn't care or allowed them to do this, or was such an idiot that he had no idea what was going on. Both
he
of
was
those,
like in favor of Reagan was in favor of it, yeah, definitely. But like Bush was the one actually running it, because Reagan was like not very smart. He wouldn't even read things. They had to make little TV movies for him about like foreign affairs because he refused to read any like the information. They would like hand him, the paper. It was just like, I don't have time to read this. Can I just watch TV? And he quit work at 5 o'clock every day to go hang out with Nancy. It's like, so Bush is like the guy really running all these deep operations because he's like the lifelong CIA guy.
So, and where is Shackley during all of this? What's Shackley doing? And does he have, because he's not officially in government, during Iran Contra, correct?
Officially, he's working for these various front companies that are set up by him and Kleins and Wilson or whatever. There's like 3 or 4 of them, like Stanford Technology and, EatsGo is actually one of them. Like, that's the same Iran Contra people. And, let's see. I don't know. Officially, he's a private businessman that's just trying to, like, make some money using his government connections. Unofficially, he's working on behalf of Bush to, like, run the Safari Club worldwide and especially to, like, do this Iran Contra thing. Because all the people in Iran Contra are, like, these Shackley loyalists. Like, Felix Rodriguez and Rafael Chichi Quintero. They had known him from Miami, Laos, Vietnam. They're down there in El Salvador, like, managing the air base for, like, the cocaine's leaving and the guns are coming in for, like, Don Hall and, like, so that's why that people thought that it was all, it's basically, like, Shackley behind the scenes is saying, I work for George Bush, I'm representing Vice President Bush, but supposedly he's just, like, a private businessman. I don't know if he really ever left the CIA because, like, one of the major things he was right about after his retirement is, like, man, the CIA really needs to employ more businessmen. This is like a great strategy. And you see that definitely today with like Omidyar and Soros. This is like the CIA business empire.
Or Rex Tillerson.
Yeah.
Anyone that doesn't think that guy is again, State Department, he's CIA through and through. The Omidyar side, look at Peter Thiel, how close he's gotten to Trump, and you look at his company like Palantir, or his funding of Facebook and all these, and getting all this other CIA money involved in there. So again, Shackley, a real trendsetter when it comes to the sort of business end or the corporate control of the CIA. So you were mentioning before some of the Israeli connection between Shackley, sort of taking the reins from Angleton, and how that would become important in Iran Contra. Flesh that out a little bit, because again, this is one of these things that I was just reading earlier today. Like Shin Bet and Mossad and a lot of the other Israeli intelligence are sort of pressuring Netanyahu right now. They're don't just throw out the Iran deal. Even though you want to and Trump wants to and whatnot, and maybe hold off on that. And again, this sort of existential enemy of Israel is Iran, but they had no problem selling them guns, right?
Well, yeah, one of Israel's strategies is to align with all like the not Arab people in the Middle East, like the Kurds and like traditionally the Iranians. So yeah, publicly they're like the enemies of Israel, but they're also definitely traditional allies. And during the Iran-Iraq war, Israel is the one funneling these weapons to Iran so that they could fight Iraq, so that, there'll be this huge bloodbath, so that their enemies will be, weakened. Whenever their neighbors are fighting, they're, like, happy about that. Just like today in Syria or whatever. It's, like, great. Let them kill each other is generally their attitude. And one of the ways they did that was just, the whole Iran-Contra thing. It was about, like, making the Iran-Iraq war as bloody and long as possible, basically. And making a bunch of money at the same time. Because, like, Israel's their economy relies on, like, selling weapons to, like, people all over the world. So they're, like, involved in this, like the Wacko network. Like, they're friends with Argentina, Taiwan, all these, like, South Africa, all these, like, right-wing kind of fascist governments. So, like, some of them America's too embarrassed to sell weapons to. Israel would always step in and be like, I'll sell the weapons. It's like, thanks, Israel.
Oh, the nukes in South Africa.
Yeah, they practically gave South Africa nukes.
Yeah, the apartheid regime. The
apartheid South Africa, not the
right. What happens? Because again, to get into Iran Contra, I think we're just going to have you back on, and we can kind of pick this apart and get into some more detail. Because again, I think it's always important to look at Iran Contra because there is so much publicly available on the scandal. Stuff that we don't or maybe won't have on other things. But you also talk about Shackley, as being sort of the front runner to 9/11 and stuff. How does that manifest? I mean, for instance, what happens after Iran Contra? What is Shackley up to?
Well, like, one of the things that, like, we used to email back and forth about is, like, it should be really called the Iran, Nicaragua, Afghanistan affair, but they wanted to keep Afghanistan out of it entirely. I mean, and you talk about, like, the cocaine's coming through Central America, but the heroin is coming out of Afghanistan, the weapons are going in. And Shackley, through the Safari Club, through the BCCI, he is, like, central in, like, funding the war in Afghanistan. And, I mean, obviously, everybody knows that that's what Al-Qaeda grows out of. So, in that sense, he was the one. I mean, he wasn't, like, necessarily involved with... he was, like, through the Safari Club, he was, like, definitely involved with, like, all the big Saudi intelligence people, like Prince Turki and stuff, that run Al-Qaeda, for the CIA. Well, that's the whole strategy that they use now, is to have these foreign intelligence terrorists do the dirty work. And then they can be like, oh, no, it's not us, it's the Saudis, it's the Qataris. Like,
right.
We didn't want the Al-Qaeda to take over Syria. It's like our allies are doing this against our will, but it's like, really, that's just a policy.
Yeah, right? I know, we should be, Qatar should be under a microscope, all the fucked up shit that it does, to its own people, and all over the world. And no doubt they are the one, they are the sort of, point man for most of these, new jihadi gangs that are popping up, things, like Al-Nusra and other things like that. But yeah, the idea that Qatar, it's, barely a country. I'm sorry to all my Qatari listeners out there, but it's this little tiny Gulf sheikdom. If they didn't have oil, they would be nothing really.
Huge military bases there. That's where we ran the Iraq War out of Qatar. It's just like this teeny country with massive U.S. military bases. So I'm sure if we wanted to whip Qatar in the line, we could, or whatever.
Yes, exactly. The idea that Qatar, that they're this sort of parallel force and that they're the ones, sort of running the show is ridiculous. I mean, they wouldn't exist on the sort of scale that they do were it not for U.S. control over them.
British,
just a good example again, if you say, we just sort of contract out all of this stuff. And again, the same thing in Afghanistan. Everybody blames the Pakistanis for the creation of the Taliban. Well, if we hadn't told the Pakistanis, all right, here's your, this is your operation now, ostensibly, blah, blah, blah. But it's funny, we were talking a little bit back there, about Israel and some of the history of this. And, during the Iran Contra scandal, we have the Israelis selling weapons to Iran, but who's the other group they're selling weapons to? The freedom fighters in Afghanistan, and that's even in the CIA-produced Charlie Wilson's War. They admit that yes, of course it was the Israelis that were selling weapons to Zia al-Haq, who was then shipping them in and then helping to create the Taliban. But I mentioned that again because, as you were saying, and we've talked about this before in our emails, that, Afghanistan was running parallel to Iran Contra. They were happening at the same exact time. Yeah. There seems to be this when people talk about Iran Contra, particularly like an older crowd that likes to pretend as if that was like a one-time scandal and that the CIA is sort of cleaned up and they've never they never sold drugs before or after the Iran Contra scandal. But these were happening at the exact same time. So the overlap is all there, and again it's a lot of the same kind of characters that keep popping up between these two operations. But go ahead, Hugo. What were you gonna say?
Well, absolutely, and the even more amazing thing is Afghanistan was not a big heroin producer until we lost the Vietnam War, and then mysteriously they moved their corporate operation over there, and that is what caused Afghanistan to become a heroin thing in the first place. It's like a replacement Laos and a replacement Vietnam. In the global heroin trade that they built up there. Like, we built up the Golden Crescent after, like, we lost the Golden Triangle. We still had Thailand, of course, but, like...
No, I know. That's like one of those. Yeah, I know. And then it's people kind of forget those things, you know, like oh yeah, it just happened. You know, all of a sudden it became this huge heroin producing country. And obviously they grew opium, they grew weed in Afghanistan. That was well known, but not on the sort of scale to which they were. Yeah,
it wasn't like
and also there weren't like tons of heroin labs in these places. You know, you talk about that in the Shackley article that, yes, of course the Hmong people grew opium, but they weren't processing it into heroin. You know, that's a different...
Until the CIA came in. Yeah, then the CIA comes in and gives them mobile heroin labs. It's like, here you go. To increase the profits, to increase the funding for the war.
And that's similar too to, you know, you look at places like Bolivia and stuff. Of course they've always grown coca there, you know, but, and obviously people were making cocaine and things, but not on the sort of like industrial scale, you know, until you get some very, you know, mysterious characters kind of popping in and giving them money.
Yeah, as Doug Valentine talks about, the like cocaine thing actually started from the Cuban exiles or whatever. The upper class Cubans love to do cocaine. They're the ones that actually spread it as a recreational drug into America. But to return to Bolivia, that is like one of the most shocking episodes that nobody ever talks about, is this Bolivian cocaine coup where we put Klaus Barbie, this like, you know, talk about going back to the beginning with like working with the Nazis in Germany, and then he goes down to South America and works for the CIA. And then we support a coup with him and the Moonies to like take over Bolivia, put like the guy in the head drug dealer's brother in charge of the police, and then that is what actually fueled the rise of the Medellin cartel in Colombia across the border. But it's like this fascist coup. They were like playing Nazi music over the thing, and they were like, yeah, this like fascist death squad, the fiancés of death. It's like this great scandal that's forgotten, the Bolivian cocaine coup. Of course, Shackley was involved in too.
Oh yeah, and you know, it's funny too. Like the show like Narcos is like super popular, and you know, I get, you know, people.
It's such a joke. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Bush is sent down to Florida to take care of the drugs. Like, that is like one of the biggest jokes in American history.
Oh, and you know, and they just, I mean, they don't even like attempt to sort of talk about it in the show Narcos. I mean, of course, the CIA in Narcos looks bad, you know, and the DEA is like, you know, just these, they're always portrayed as sort of the gun-toting cowboys that want to do good, you know, and it's really
from my perspective, the main character in Narcos had to have been in the CIA because, you know, this guy's creating Colombian death squads to go after these traffickers, supposedly. I mean, that is like what you get. That's what you get your CIA guy and the DEA to do, not just like your DEA guy. You know what I'm saying?
Oh well, this is what I was just going to say. Is I mean, along those lines, is again the whole saga of Escobar is always seen through this. You know, he lived this, you know, fantastic, ostentatious lifestyle, and he was rich and famous, and he, you know, he was a congressman in Colombia, and he owned all the soccer teams, and he was sort of above the law, and it was the brave DEA that took him down. But, you know, you have to assume that if the DEA is taking him down, then he's just simply not on their payroll. You know, he's not one of their allies. And who is, you know, in the background of all this, the Cali cartel, excuse me, which flourished, which, you know, I assume still exists in some capacity today. And again, the Cali cartel funds these groups like Los Pepes, the sort of right-wing paramilitary organizations that work as death squads in Colombia. And, they also have this weird, there's this sort of like, nobody talks about it, but they had this very bizarre fascist ideology where they wanted to sort of cleanse the Colombia of, you know, all the undesirables like prostitutes, homosexuals, anybody that they sort of viewed as evil. And again, all these guys they're white. They're all European. You know, they're not indigenous Colombians. They're not black. You know, they're not Afro-Cuban or Colombians or anything like that. So again, and there is some evidence that the CIA was at least allowing the Cali cartel to flourish. And it's not surprising that they also had this weird right-wing bent where they wanted to, commit genocide. And they would do this. The Cali cartel set up these groups that would go through the poorer sections of Colombian cities, like in Bogota and Medellin and Cali and other places, and actually just kill people left and right that were quote unquote undesirables. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of problems with the show Narcos. I didn't watch all of it. But the lack of talking about the CIA's role in all of this, again, too, I mean, you're talking, when was Escobar killed? Into the 90s? I mean, the CIA completely controlled the DEA at that point.
The real reason Escobar was killed is because the same reason they took down Noriega. He knew too much about Bush, because the Medellin cartel was their cocaine that was getting smuggled through the Iran Contra operation. The CIA just sort of switched over the Cali cartel, but originally they were allied to the Medellin too. And then that's really what they do in these drug wars is when one person becomes too infamous, they'll side with another gang and then lock him up. It's another victory for the war on drugs. And then meanwhile, they're already funding the Cali cartel or whatever. So yeah, you're right that they just sort of switched over to them, and then they keep switching over in Mexico. But as for the Cali cartel's fascist ideology, I don't know that much about it, but it's definitely part of what I call the wacko network, where they put all these Nazis down into Latin America, and they were they were spreading out downright straight up fascist things, just like in Bolivia, and also in Colombia you saw that with Pablo Escobar's partner Carlos Leder, where he was this what's called third wave fascism, where it's fascists that like communists as well. So it's so it seems like he's just crazy when he says oh, I love Mao and Hitler. But really it's it was this trend that was because of the popularity of left-wing radical guerrilla groups through the 70s, the fascists started copying them and pretending that they were revolutionaries or whatever as well. So
and it's the whole, Escobar stealing the sword of Simon Bolivar, I mean, or stealing it back from the I forget the left-wing group that took it. But yeah, of course he's playing into all of that sort of stuff. The Leder character is a complete nut job. And I think he was German too. He's German Colombian. And he's featured briefly in the movie Blow, with Johnny Depp, and he's just sort of portrayed as this insane, coked up psycho who lives in his private island in the Bahamas. But the rumors with him is that, he, that he knew intimate details about Iran Contra. And I think that's why he was arrested at one point, but he wasn't sentenced to too long because they were so terrified that he might spill the beans. But I mean, of course, it's where do you think this coke was coming from in Iran Contra? It was right from Escobar.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's as you say, I mean, and again, why I like your writing so much is you kind of just really present a truthful historical overview of all of these sort of events. And again, definitely going to have to get you back on to get more into Iran Contra, and also to maybe briefly, you keep mentioning WACL. What is WACL?
WACL is the World Anti-Communist League, and that's the real reason I started my Iran Contra series was just to write about WACL, but I was the major role is in Iran Contra. I was thinking, do kids that even know about Iran Contra is? I mean, it's that nobody talks about it. The anniversary came and nobody discussed it barely at all. It's just let's just forget about this episode. It's not
30 years.
Watergate they always talk about, but Iran Contra they never want to talk about. And so, WACL is this World Anti-Communist League, which is an international group of fascist drug dealers and terrorists. It's this fascinating collection of, and it interlocks all the CIA programs. the Phoenix program people, they were like wacko members. Death Squads in Latin America, they're wacko members. All like the Nazis from like that we recruited during the Cold War, they're all in wacko. Like especially the Ukrainians were like huge in wacko, and that is like they have all this power within our there's a Ukraine lobby. It's because of like these wacko Ukrainians. They're still around today, like tweeting like this. The Dobryansky family. I think this guy's Andriy Dobryansky. He's like the grandson of Lev Dobryansky, who's this Ukrainian fascist wacko guy who's like the president, the leader of the ABN, which is like all of the fascist groups. Hitler had started like the anti-Bolshevik bloc, and after the Cold War, this guy's like, let's just have the ABN. They're like a major component of wacko. So basically, it started off in Asia with the APACL, in Latin America with CAL, in Eastern Europe with ABN, and then they all merged into one big global drug smuggling, terrorist, fascist organization, which I discovered. I think it's like a research gold mine, but it's like nobody seemed to care really. It's like, whatever. I mean, but this is like Gladio on steroids, basically. Like Gladio is just a part of this huge international fascist alliance, wacko. And then after the Cold War, they just changed their name to like the World League for Freedom and Democracy. And they're still
I know, that's great, right?
And like, they're behind the coup in Ukraine, or like at least the forces that they helped keep alive during the Cold War. After like the Soviet Union lost, they sent all these people in to take over their countries, like Croatia and Ukraine, or like these straight up fascist countries, which of course, just like during the Cold War, it's like, no, Ukraine is a democratic, wonderful experiment in democratic revolution. It's like, yeah, right. It's like,
you also find, like virtually every so-called anti-communist guerrilla group, if they weren't, I don't know, maybe like massaged by Wackel, they got money from them shortly after. So
yeah, they love them. Well, so then these people are like the heroes, the global Contra force, you could say. Like Contra just meant counter-revolutionary. So it's like, CIA waging dirty wars all over the planet during the 80s, and Wackel's fundraising for all of these people. Like to them, just like for me, this is World War III. You've got to fight like everywhere on the planet. So it's like in Africa, they're funding UNITA and Renamo, and like
Renamo, yeah.
And they're funding the Contras and the death squads in like El Salvador and Guatemala. They're funding like, they're funding like the Khmer Rouge probably, to, like wage war in Vietnam and stuff like that.
Oh, and also, I mean, then Reverend Moon from the Unification Church, the Moonies, was very involved in Wackel, and so just these sort of crazy weird, and Moon and the Unification Church has always been a CIA asset.
And deeply tied in with Bush as well.
Yes, and all of the kind of psycho right-wingers, like in the Council for National Policy, which I've mentioned on the show before, and of course Reverend Moon was like a founding member of the CNP and the Unification Church, deeply involved in a lot of CNP operations and things, including what I think, the whole White House call boys scandal. Why and how that happened, I think, was really being controlled by Reverend Moon and the CNP. But Wackel is like behind so many of these things, and again, it's like, I don't even think people realize that it still exists today. I mein, it is like you can go. They have an active website. Of course, they've changed their name, and they still support like people like I want to say like John McCain. Is mentioned Wackel and things like that. And of course he would.
Of course.
But
wherever there's a Contra, there's John McCain, like right at, wherever there's a Syrian death squad, there's John McCain. Wherever there's Nazis burning people alive, there's John McCain. Like, hooray for freedom.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, it's just like, there really is like no denying that Wackel was integral in Iran Contra. I mean, that's like even mainstream news admits that. with all these Nazi collaborators.
Yeah, that's what Michael got famous for. And I think the real reason they wrote that book, Inside the League, was to, like, distract from, like, the real funding of Iran Contra, to be like, it's just these wacko people, like, you know, it's not like the White House. It's like, it's wacko. That's who's funding the Contras. Of course, behind Wacko's and CIA, which they're not supposed to allow to be doing that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. Just crazy, crazy stuff. We're coming up towards the end of the show. Hugo, any just a kind of like current event stuff. I don't know if you watched the speech that our illustrious new leader Donald Trump gave at the CIA headquarters. But do you have any kind of sense, given the sort of historical take that you have on a lot of things, or you know, the outlook, any kind of sense as to what we might see in terms of CIA operations under Donald Trump, or is he just basically not going to care? Which is where I'm leaning more and more. He's just going to let them do whatever they want. But what's your take?
I think, well, it seems like he went there to just, that was his version of like, please stop, like, this whole soft coup, like, in America scenario. And then, like, they still weren't happy with it because they're like, this guy's a narcissist. He doesn't care enough about the CIA. Like, he's selfish. He doesn't, you know, it's like, even surrender isn't good enough. But obviously, like, you know, the CIA has people on the Trump side and on the Democratic side. But, like, apparently liberals now believe, like, the only way to save democracy is to have a CIA coup. I mean, don't they ever read history books? I mean, study, like, what happened in Chile and tell it. They said that saved democracy down there. It's like this fascist dictator rounding people up in sports stadiums and being tortured to death. I mean, people need to stop, calm down. We don't need to have a civil war. We've had idiots in power, fascists before, like Reagan and Bush, and corrupt. I mean, Hillary was like the more dangerous candidate in my view, because she just was like, my plan is to start start a nuclear war in Syria to, like, protect it. They really weren't blowing up the world in order to, like, install Al-Qaeda death squads in the name of human rights. I mean, our foreign policy just becomes so divorced from, like, reality that it's like living in an insane asylum, basically.
You know, though, I wonder if, like, the more and more the shift seems to be to, well, like, we've got to destroy China. You know, like, Trump is, like, surrounded by more of these, like, China hawks, and that seems to be the country that he really has a boner for, China, and then to a lesser degree, Iran. So, you know, that's what I wonder or fear about, is that...
Talk about the continuing legacy of Iran Contra is that, you know, even though Trump supposedly opposed the CIA, why is he friends with, like, these notorious allies, like the nationalist KMT Chinese, who are, like, you know, they're the ones that started this global heroin network and, like, all this deep state stuff. And apparently he's friends with these Taiwanese, and he's friends with the Cuban 2506 Brigade. So I think, like, if there is a smart faction behind Trump, they're like, we need to, like, calm down with, like, the Syria war because we're losing anyway. So it's better just to, like, you know, save face by saying it was, like, the Democrats' fault and just let Russia relax, because it's pushing. When they did the Ukraine coup, they basically forced Russia out of the stage, and now we're all, like, freaking out, like, we're losing all of the world, and, like, it's actually a big mistake, it seems like, in hindsight, I'm sure. So it's like we could calm that down, bully the Chinese instead, you know.
Well, that seems to be the total, yeah, exactly. I know, and I don't understand how some people seem to be like, yeah, sweet, like, we're allies with Russia, so that we can go after China? Like, that's just switching sides. That's not actually doing anything different. And
it doesn't make any sense. Because Russia and China will be, like, allies, because they're not going to trust America, and Russia needs China's economic power, and China needs Russia's military power to a certain extent. They've already been forced into becoming friends, and I doubt if Russia's really ever going to trust, because once Trump's out of office, they know it's, even if he did succeed in being pro-Russian, which I don't think he will be able to do, there'll be just somebody else next, and it will just go back to, like, Russia's to blame for everything. Because we need to project onto Russia this idea that, you know, there's an aggressive force trying to conquer the world. It's like, no, America's the one that's trying to conquer the world. It's been doing it for the past 70 years. Russia's just, like, scared.
Well, and here to bring everything full circle, you were just talking about the KMT, the Kuomintang, which is of course the right wing or anti-communist Chinese forces. That's General Chiang Kai-shek, and of course they're very involved in heroin trafficking, and then moved to Taiwan. Trump's first phone call, of course, is the Taiwanese prime minister, and it's a big deal. And who is his nominee for Secretary of Transportation? Elaine Chao, who is a Taiwanese American, married
transportation?
and married to Mitch McConnell, who was one of the big Iran Contra, anti-drug hawks. And Elaine Chao's family, very big into shipping, and they were caught in one of their big ships with 40 kilos of cocaine. And they have no idea where it came from. It was just like, and again, one of these little like mini scandals that just came and went, and nobody cares. And now this woman is going to be in charge of all transportation.
As soon as you said she was, a nationalist Chinese being put in charge of transportation, I mean, I was just like, drug smuggling. And then when you said there was a scandal, I was like, yeah. But
look it up. It's the Mei Ping is the name of the ship. And it's owned by Chao's family.
Like, Trump has all these, Trump he's just a front man to the mafia stuff, and it's like, his mentor was Roy Cohn, ironically. He was started the McCarthyite thing. So it's like bizarre that Trump is like a victim of the neo-McCarthyism, but like, yeah, he's connected to the mafia, so in that sense, he's connected to the deep state, to the underworld, whereas Hillary was like, more I guess was like the overworld, Wall Street. It's in the CIA, but they both, he's friends with all these like sinister types of forces that we've been talking about this whole 2 hours, like these Cubans and these Taiwanese.
Mm-hmm. And his longtime helicopter pilot was a cocaine smuggler. Somehow never really got in any trouble for it, and was constantly protected by somebody, and Trump always made excuses for this guy, and he's again allegedly a friend of Joey Ippolito, who's of course deeply involved in cocaine and in the O.J. Simpson case, and in the probable I think the probable guy behind Nicole and Ronald's killing. So this is, this is Donald Trump. That would be an interesting topic that maybe we can get into another time too, is just I think it's one of these things that people aren't looking at, but is Trump just going to be like the drug trafficking president? Because there's so many connections to trafficking in and around him. And again, we've got El Chapo is, extradited. He's now in Brooklyn, awaiting trial. No one is really sure exactly what's going to follow.
Somebody knows too much. Being prosecuted for knowing too much.
And definitely, absolutely, yeah, of course. And it's funny. He's going to probably go to jail, whereas one of his top lieutenants is, I think, is just out free. He was in Chicago, but of course claimed total immunity because he was a CIA informant. That raises even more questions about the Sinaloa cartel and their connections to the American deep state, and particularly with the CIA. Hugo, where can people go to read your articles, and where can they find you on the internet?
My blog at Anti-Imperialist-U, blogspot, at Global Research and at STOT. And you could find me on Facebook and follow me on Twitter at Hugo Turner 1969.
Excellent. And Hugo, I know you said that in one of your recent posts that you were sort of taking a break, but you will be writing again soon, right?
Yeah, I'll be coming back in February on a series on Haiti.
Oh, great. Well, I'd love to get you in, I'd love to have you on, to talk about Haiti. Again, I highly recommend, Hugo's work. You can also find it linked up on my website. And of course, we will link up to the article on Ted Shackley, but also Hugo's series on Iran Contra. Well, thank you all so much for joining me. I'm not sure who my guest will be next week, but, stay tuned. It'll be a good episode, and I will be talking to you all soon.
News and information you can trust. This is American Freedom Radio. Freedom, American Freedom Radio. Freedom Radio.